Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your service to our country. I'd like to ask you questions about several national security threats across the globe, starting with what you and Senator Donnelly were just discussing, which is the situation with ISIS. Right now in Iraq, roughly how many Americans are on the ground in Iraq, both civilian and military?
Senator, I'm not sure how many exactly. I think it's somewhere short of 1,000.
How would you characterize our ability right now to ensure the safety of those Americans?
I'm confident that General Austin, the commander of the United States Central Command, who I speak to several times a week, has taken proper measures to provide force protection for those forces, and in the environment that he's put them in, he's made sure that there's measures to mitigate the risk to the force. But certainly a dangerous combat environment, always a risk, but I'm also confident in General Austin's leadership that he's done all he can to mitigate that risk.
What about the American civilians who are in Iraq? What is our ability to ensure their safety?
Senator, at this time, I'm not aware of our capacity to actually provide security for the civilians that are in Iraq, unless you're talking about U.S. government civilians, in which case they're certainly part of the whole comprehensive force protection plan on the ground for both our diplomatic personnel as well as our uniformed personnel. If you're talking about people that are there in a private capacity, then I think our ability to provide security to them on a day-to-day basis is fairly limited.
To what extent is our ability to maintain security both for civilian and military personnel dependent upon the Shia militia that are there?
Senator, I think the security conditions in Iraq as a whole are absolutely linked to the political process and the viability of the government. I mean, that's, I think, how we get in the situation we're in. It's a manifestation of a lack of inclusive government in political challenges that spilled over into security. And I think it shows the inextricable link between stability and security as well as viable governance.
General, I will share with you I am deeply concerned about our ability to protect the Americans who are there, particularly as the situation seems to be deteriorating. And we find ourselves between two implacable foes. ISIS, who are so extreme that they were thrown out of al-Qaeda, which is a pretty remarkable feat, and who have expressed an open desire to attack and kill Americans. And on the other side, the Islamic Republic of Iran, who likewise are rabidly anti-American and have the same desire. And what nobody wants to see is a reprise of what we saw in the late 1970s, another hostage situation of Americans who find themselves in an incredibly hostile situation where enemy forces capture Americans and hold them hostage. And so, number one, I would certainly urge you and urge your colleagues in the military to continue doing, and I know you're endeavoring to do this, but to continue doing everything humanly possible to prevent against such a situation and to do everything we can to mitigate the risks of it spiraling out of control so that American citizens are not caught between two warring factions and trapped in a place from which we have no ready exit.
I'll do that, Senator.
Let's shift to a neighboring country, which is very much involved right now in what's happening in Iraq, and that is Iran. In your military judgment, how significant of a threat would you characterize the possibility of Iran acquiring nuclear weapon capability?
I think that'd be extraordinarily significant, Senator.
In your judgment, what would happen if Iran were to acquire nuclear weapon capability?
I think they would use the leverage of nuclear weapons to meet their expansionist objectives and destabilize the region.
If, God forbid, Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, and if, God forbid, they were to make the second decision of being willing to use those weapons based on the radical religious extremism that motivates so-called Supreme Leader Khomeini and the mullahs in Iran. In your view, how much damage could Iran do to America or her allies if Iran was willing to use nuclear weapons to maximize the damage?
Senator, it would be hard for me to envision how they may use those or what might happen, but I can say that clearly that would be a threat to our vital national interest, which is the protection of the homeland and the people of the United States.
If Iran, say, were able to use a nuclear weapon launched from a ship offshore of the United States into the atmosphere to create an EMP on the eastern seaboard, what would the impact be to this country?
Well, any nuclear weapon that would go off in the United States would have a horrific effect on people.
And an EMP in particular, how would that impact the civilian population if an EMP were detonated in the atmosphere above the eastern seaboard?
Yeah, EMP would essentially shut down our communications network, would be one of the more significant outcomes of EMP.
Would there be additional impacts in terms of transportation, in terms of distribution of food, in terms of distribution of basic means for survival?
All those things, Senator, are impacted by our ability to communicate. So my expectation is that all of them would be adversely affected.
And let me finally shift to Afghanistan. How significant would you characterize the threat right now of radical Islamic terrorism, both in Afghanistan and in neighboring Pakistan?
We are managing the threat to the homeland now as a result of the pressure that we're putting on the network. So I believe we are at moderate risk as a result of the extremists in the region. But again, that risk is assessed in the context of the forces that we have on the ground inside of Afghanistan and our efforts with Pakistan.
And so the final question on exactly that point, if we proceed with the plan that the President has laid out in 2016 to drop our forces to roughly 1,000 and in 2017 to drop it to 0, what will be our capacity to engage in counterterrorism to limit the threat from the radical Islamic terrorists in that region?
The tools that we'll have available to deal with or to conduct counterterrorism in 2017 in the scenario that you've outlined is the will and capacity of Pakistan and the will and capacity of Afghanistan.
So we would be dependent on their forces and unable on our own to defend ourselves from terrorist threats emanating from that region.
Again, Senator, if you're projecting a threat and you're projecting that we would not have any forces there, then we would be dependent on Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Well, that is a deeply troubling scenario. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Gillibrand.